I think we heard from three very well-informed individuals in this area, and so I'd like to open the floor for questions and answers around the broad topic of undergraduate and graduate education, and we'll even fold in training in that as well on the basis of some of the comments we've heard.
Yeah, I'm Alok Sinha from Penn State. I think all the things that you discussed are quite important. I fully agree with them. But at the same time, emphasizing all the time about hands-on experience and projects, sometimes the message gets across that fundamentals are not important. And so we should always emphasize that mastery of fundamental is very important. And then comes the project, which is also important. Now I will bring your example of football. You brought the example of football, which the Belichick New England Patriot. I think it captures most of it, but not everything. I will give you an example of musician. In order to be a good musician, you have to know the fundamentals, and they are very innovative people also. So we should also keep in mind other models so that we have a holistic picture.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the model of music. It's one that we use a lot. If you were to prepare a musician to become a professional, the way most of us prepare engineers, the educational model would look something like this. In the first year in music school, they would take a course in the theory of vibration and sound. So they would learn about mode shapes and natural frequencies of strings and of columns of air. In the second year, they would learn about the theory of music, so about harmony and melody, point and counterpoint and tempo. And in the third year, they would take a course in orchestration, how to blend the voices with the woodwinds and the percussion. And in the fourth year, if you're still here, we'll give you a violin and you'll play a scale and we'll give you a degree in music. The way you learn music is by playing it. And every musician has to express music every day. It's like oxygen. They play this in small groups. They don't begin by playing Mendelssohn. You might play Twinkle Little Star, but you build up this repertoire. I think engineering is a performing art, and you build up the repertoire in the same way. You learn music theory along the way, but you don't do it at the expense of playing music. Why do we wait to the senior year to have a project when students are motivated by making things from the beginning? I totally agree with you that fundamentals are absolutely critical. This is not a trade-off. It's the way you present it. You can prepare musicians who are rigorously prepared in all of those theories without doing it by all of the theory first, and then at the very end, you give them a violin.
Thank you.
I like the example of I heard recently that a month in the lab will save you an hour in the library. I think that's probably appropriate when you think about the aspect of fundamental research, aspects of a project or a process. I do want to point out, though, and I also want to applaud what Rick said about the timing. It isn't necessarily that you have to have all the fundamentals completed first and then followed by application. I believe that in my example with industry fellow program, that you might be able to have some experience with industry early on in the project that may actually improve the project overall. So I think fundamentals are critically important, but in the traditional model of fundamentals then application may not necessarily be the approach to follow in today's world.
Just to point out, in addition to music, you should look at medicine. In Harvard Medical School, for example, 25 years ago, created something called the New Pathways Program. Anyone in here who's worried about the trade-off between learning in projects versus learning in courses should take a look at this program. There's a book written about this by Dean Tosteson. He was concerned that the human genome was coming. 4 years in medical school was not enough to learn everything. Students couldn't remember the fundamental sciences when they got into rounds in the hospital. So his solution, let's stop teaching the fundamentals. Shocking. Instead, they teach them how to learn from day one. I was shocked at this personally. We went in and watched it. The students take 1 hour of lecture a day, and then they get real case studies. The instructor comes in and puts a folder on the table. This is the case of Mrs. Smith. She was in the ER last night with severe headaches. The MRI scan for Mrs. Smith is in the folder. What's wrong with Mrs. Smith? And he sits down and he folds his arms. The next day he comes in, he puts a folder, there's the blood work on Mrs. Smith. Now what's wrong?
Yeah, although I must point out that medical education is a graduate education.
Exactly.
So that's a very different thing at a graduate level. In order to get into medicine, you have to demonstrate very good fundamental knowledge.
Okay, we have
And
lots
they
of,
have,
Yes.
we have lots of questions here, so I think let's continue.
Andrew Lean, University of Illinois. I think both of you touched on, all three of you, that sort of statement up there, in particular sort of the last 5 words, no matter where they are, is the gist of my question. So we educate and train a lot of people here in the U.S. and then tell them to go home. And I think when you say that statement, a lot of people sort of automatically think I'm talking about graduate students. But at U of I, between sort of the late 90s and the sort of 2009 timeframe, we went from about 3 international undergrads to 20%, roughly. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andreas, ballpark. And I think many other colleges are doing the same thing. So it's not just the graduate level, it's also the undergraduate level. We're training some of the best and the brightest and tell them to go home. So how do we capitalize on that? I've got my own thoughts, but I'm curious from your perspective, how do we try and retain that human capital and sort of make it work well for the country?
Let me, so I'm answering to my colleague at Urbana-Champaign, but I think he brings up this question because I know it's on everyone's mind. I do believe that that in this day and age, there is no difference between educating talent, whether they're undergraduates or graduates, in the following sense. People are very interested in having the opportunity to get exposed to the best in their field, to get exposed to ideas that allows them to take whatever it is that they do and turn it into success. And they want to move around. I will tell you, yes, we do educate many students in Urbana-Champaign that come from Asia. We try to keep a good number of them in the United States. There are forces that I don't control that get in the way. I believe those forces are coming to terms with the fact that there is an opportunity here, very much like the opportunity with graduate education in the United States, that we have to aggressively pursue. But at the same time, I do believe that the United States should become a proponent of global partnerships of institutions, where institutions come together and on the basis of rules, if you wish, or expectations in terms of the principles we have and the quality of education we offer, we allow students to move freely from institution to institution and complete their degrees. I say this because at the end of the day, many of the companies that hire our students, Kathy mentioned a good number of our students go to industry, they're going to find themselves working somewhere else in the rest of the world. And the more proactive we are in making those boundaries when it comes to education irrelevant, the more successful we're going to be in keeping those students that come here in the United States and also reaching out and educating many more elsewhere.
Andrea Armani, University of Southern California. So I wanted to get back to Richard's point. So I agree that it's very important to have kind of a design education, kind of following the model of the music program. But how do you reconcile that with ABET, which has been the bane of my life for 3 years? Anyone here involved with ABET, please don't hurt my university. But how do you reconcile those two things other than trying to convince parents that having an accredited degree isn't a good thing?
Thank you for bringing that up. Accreditation, of course, is an important concern, I think, for all of our programs. Every time you buckle up in that plane to go home, you want to make sure that the kids actually learn the stress analysis somewhere. Olin has, in fact, not had significant problems with ABET through 2 complete cycles. I think if you look at the criteria 2000, at least if the criteria stays, I know there's some concerns now about possible change, but the current criteria says that you need to identify your mission, define the outcomes that you expect to create, develop a process for measuring those outcomes, use the data that you obtain from watching the outcomes play out in industry and in graduate school, and make changes. It's less prescriptive than it has been in the past. If you have reasonable reviewers, I think ABET is not the roadblock. It's not a reason not to try to innovate.
Okay, once again, we're at the 5 questions, 5 answers.
Very
5
quickly.
minutes.
My name is Kirk Carlson. I'm the former CEO of SRI International. And I want to thank the 3 panelists. I thought they were brilliant presentations, really inspiring. I'd like to ask Richard a question. The design methodology isn't a superb one, and it's been going on now for a long time. Very effective. I associate it with the maker movement, and your chart was very provocative. I would ask you, to me, it seems very limited now compared to the vision you put forward. What would you call the next generation of innovation methodologies that would really begin to move the dial the way you described?
I wish I knew. We are still learning. The design thinking methodology that we have been using is borrowed really from work that started at Stanford in the D School. David Kelly is on our advisory council and has been a mentor in this process. I don't know actually what the format for the education model is that creates innovation. That's the big question mark on the right-hand edge of the graph. It's quite real. It's sort of our research agenda for the next 5 years.
Add to this, when you talk to industrial designers and artists, they will tell you, we don't like the term design thinking. And it's pretty much along the lines of what you just said. It has been around for a while. But what they do appreciate is the fact that the more opportunities we have, the more opportunities we give our higher education community to experiment with what you do with these things, the more new ideas will come out. And I was talking with Carl Bass from Autodesk, and he was excited about the possibility of having schools around the country buy into this idea that education across the disciplines will have to be founded on the common thread, and that is making things happen. He didn't call it design, but just making things happen.
My name's Dean Chang from the University of Maryland. My question is also about design thinking. So at Stanford, which you referenced, they have a small number of courses that graduate students have to apply to get into. In Northwestern, it's now required for a 20-week course for all their engineering freshmen. At Maryland, we teach 2 to 3 week modules to freshmen, and working with Daryl Pines in senior capstone courses. But my question is, it's much more resource intensive. You typically have teaching teams of not 1 instructor, but 2, 3, 4 instructors. Often if you're not the first instructor, you only get partial or no credit for it towards your teaching load. So how do you pay for this much more time intensive, resource intensive, and just generally dollars expensive way of teaching, which is fantastic? Do you have differential tuition? Do you have different business models? I'll leave it at that.
With this, I think you should talk to Lori Breslow at MIT. She's been head of their teaching and learning lab for a long time. The data that she has shows that there's an initial investment in teaching faculty to work in this mode, and after that initial investment, it's basically cost neutral. It's a little bit like switching from a lecture mode to teaching a graduate seminar, where the preparation time is actually less, but the amount of interaction goes up.
One comment, we found that the Professor of Practice program has been very beneficial in contributing to the development of these programs and working with the students. It's a different model. Certainly it's a team of faculty who come from the tenure track model, as well as the Professors of Practice, but that has allowed us to grow that program. And I know there's a great difference between what goes on in a small private institution and a large public institution. So we have to be somewhat creative with the design labs, innovation centers, to ensure that we have done so, created these programs in a cost-effective manner.
Bogdan Aparani, University of Michigan. I couldn't help but notice great ideas that were discussed here, but one of the characteristics of what Rick mentioned and what Catherine mentioned was the fact that at Olin College, the faculty don't have tenure, and at Texas A&M, professor of practice are very successful, and I think they don't have tenure either. So I was wondering, as we are reorganizing education, or rethinking education, we are rethinking perhaps also things about the university. So the question is, do you see any connections or correlations, any comments about tenure process at the universities related to this?
The tenure process works very well, and it's a program that certainly we're not questioning. However, having people from different backgrounds with a different perspective certainly improves the educational experience for the students. So I believe that we can't just have one group or one group of individuals with exactly the same experience. We have to have diverse schools of thought when we develop these innovation type models.
Brief comment. While Olin does not have tenure, we have renewable contracts of 6-year terms. In practice, it works almost exactly the same as post-tenure review and with teeth in real institutions. It's not nearly as important as not having departments. Not having departments really changed the culture.
I would like to add one comment to this. Without doubt, one of the things that will lead to a sustainable model about the way we think of the future of education is going to be is how you reward and you make sure the faculty view that as one of the opportunities for them. Many of the things we're trying to do require creativity that will come from the faculty. So you want the faculty to be involved. You want to have professors of practice. I think that's a very important element. But at the end of the day, you want the faculty to be rethinking of how they engage the students and teach the students. So one of the conversations that is happening nationally, we know the National Science Foundation is very supportive of this, is rethinking of how you reward innovation in education. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind because faculty are going to come up with the ideas.
Kelly Sullivan, Pacific Northwest National Lab. I was struck by the comment about, but the medical school example you gave, well, that's a graduate program. And so I felt compelled to point out that's not necessarily a problem in the sense that if you expect people to participate in things and give them the opportunity, they will do so. We have high school students as interns at our lab doing research at our laboratory every year. We have freshmen, college students coming in every year. They don't have those basic core fundamentals down for the science yet, but they're in the lab learning how to do the research. So engage those students early on, and they will be much more excited about the graduate school later on. And so Richard and I discussed the high school programs earlier, and I wanted to point that out, that they just because they're young doesn't mean they shouldn't be in the research lab.
So Conrad Tucker from Penn State. I'm actually in an engineering design program, and as you know, design is multidisciplinary in nature, it's nonlinear. How do you propose updating the metrics that we use to evaluate knowledge acquisition and transfer?
Good question.
Maybe I'll just comment that this whole radical rethinking of the infusion of design as central to what engineering is does require change in metrics and change in what matters and change in how you reward people. Just as FYI, we ran into the brick wall at our place too. If you use a 3-ring binder with 3 tabs, it says teaching, research, and service, and you only count reviewed journal articles, you too will have trouble. We reinvented it. We changed, this is 100% faculty vote, which is, I can't get faculty to vote 100% on where to have lunch. So doing this with the faculty manual was really unusual. The 3 tabs are now replaced with 3 distributions which overlap. So there isn't distinct tabs. Teaching is now renamed Building Student Success. Service is now renamed Building the Institution. And research is now Nationally Visible Achievement, which can be educational achievement as well as it could be in research. It's still early. it seems to have resolved a lot of the conflicts that we run into about how you recognize and reward things.
I'm going to close this session now, but we just was chock full of fantastic ideas and a really terrific panel. So let's thank Rick, Kathy, and Andreas.